who has a quarterback as a head coach. Now, Kay Stevenson was not a Hall of Famer quarterback. Still, he played the position. Do you think that will help you even more develop quicker, Jim, as a pro?
Oh, yes, definitely, because I've heard that he's a great coach and he can coach quarterbacks, and I think he has the capabilities just like Coach Morrow. I think that I still have a lot to learn, and with the great coaching that he's been projecting, I think that it's going to be excellent for me and for the other quarterbacks.
Well, Jim, again, congratulations on your selection. Jim Kelly out of Miami as quarterback, the number 14 selection overall in the National Football League draft. Going to Buffalo, we are awaiting New England and their selection. But meanwhile, Greg Wyatt is standing by in Los Angeles. The Rams have the number 2 selection. They picked early, and here he is with Ray Nagel. Greg Wyatt.
Well, the sun is just barely rising behind us as it's still very, very early here on the Pacific Coast. Executive Vice President of the Los Angeles Rams, Ray Nagel, is with me. Ray, any surprises so far in this draft for you?
Well, basically, according to our scouts, it's gone pretty much according to form. So I'd say probably not.
You know, our people back in New York were saying that Tony Hunter is kind of the Sean Farrell of '83, that they thought that he would have gone a little bit sooner.
Well, we thought so, too. We're very high on Tony Hunter. We thought that he would go a little higher.
When you look at the situation with Baltimore, you obviously were having several conversations with Marvin Demoff concerning John Elway. Did it surprise you that Baltimore did not work out a trade by today?
It really did, and there's some speculation that there might still be a trade before the first round is over.
Of course, obviously, that speculation has to be with Al Davis and the L.A. Raiders.
No comment on that one, thanks.
Yeah. But when you look at this situation, you were mentioning something about seeing some of the offensive linemen going before some of the defensive people.
Well, that's just a personal observation. I felt like maybe the defensive people would go before offensive linemen, or perhaps your so-called skill positions.
Okay, you have a couple of picks in the second round now. There might be some pretty fair quarterbacks still around by then.
Well, I think so. We have the 32nd pick and also the 36th pick, so we should be able to get something pretty good.
Okay, now some more information concerning Elway is that it was approximately a half hour ago there was a conversation between John Elway and Frank Kush of Baltimore, and Elway mentioned to him that there is no way that I am going to play for Baltimore. I can't believe that you did not take the 3 number 1s for me. I am going to baseball. So that's the latest as far as Elway up in San Jose. And now back to New York.
Here's the commissioner.
New England Patriots. New England's first choice in the first round, quarterback, Tony Eason, Illinois. Next up, Atlanta.
Okay, so the quarterback of this day, the 4th quarterback to go. First Elway, then Blackledge, then Kelly, and now Tony Eason has gone with the New England Patriots, and that more or less confirms what we've just been bouncing back and forth as to their plans.
That's right. With Eason there, they didn't think he was going to be available. There's some scouts who think that down the road Eason's going to be a tremendous quarterback. Of course, now they have 3 quarterbacks there. Perhaps there might be a subsequent deal now involving one of them, Grogan or Kavanaugh. But now most everybody had projected Gary Anderson, the Arkansas wide receiver, as going to New England. Now the big question is, where will he finally end up?
He might end up in San Diego. They've got 2 more picks.
They loved him anyway.
They loved him. They loved him even for their first pick, the number 5 pick. Now they have 2 more picks left. They can do 1 defense and 1 offense. But I'll tell you something about Eason. Jim Finks told me, he says, after this draft is history, 10 years from now, Eason will be the one player remembered, even more so than Elway. And I said, why don't you draft him? And he said, well, we have a quarterback. We have more needs. But he thinks he's the best one.
Let me ask you a little bit about this now. With the quarterback situation that the Patriots have, they had the best offer on the table to the Colts regarding the Elway situation. A number 1 and a number 2 this year and next year. Number 1 is gone now, but how about packaging one of their other quarterbacks to Baltimore, plus the number 2 and the number 1 and the number 2 of next year? Is that out of the realm of possibility?
It's crazy. It's only if Baltimore is absolutely panicked and they're afraid of getting nothing. Why do they need damaged goods? I mean, they have 2 hurt quarterbacks. They have a better quarterback right there playing for them. He's playing in the division, and then you have to ask, where's Billy Sullivan going to get all that money? I mean, he's having a lot of money problems. There might be a payoff on the Raiders thing. He had to buy his team back. He's got severe problems there. Is he going to get up to that $7 million package? I don't think it's very likely.
You think the Elway situation will be finalized before this day is over?
Well, of course, he's called the press conference for 2 o'clock on the coast, 5 o'clock here. So I guess he's giving the Colts a lot of time to try to get themselves out of this. Greg Wyatt just mentioned about the 3 number ones. I don't know that San Diego ever really made that offer. So Atlanta's coming up, and the Colts have to be panicking right now. They're doing a lot of sweat.
My spies tell me that Al Davis is going to draft Elway and then sue the league saying the draft is illegal. They have as much right to him as anybody else.
That could happen before it's all over, the way it's gone in years past. Okay, the selection, Tony Eason to the New England Patriots. We're waiting on the Falcons. ESPN's live and continuous coverage of the draft will continue after these messages.
ESPN here in the Sports Center along with Chris Berman and Bud Wilkinson. I'm Bob Lee. As we await the first and the only selection in the first round for Atlanta, it will be the number 16 selection overall. Let's step back for a second and take a look at the man that New England, though, has selected, number 15 overall, Tony Eason, or Charles Carroll Eason IV, with 4.75 speed, a man who was coached by Mike White. Mike White knows quarterbacks.
Well, he's done a great job with all of his quarterbacks and has really brought the passing game, he and Darrell Rogers, into the Big Ten Conference. I think it's very interesting, though, if you're looking down the road a little bit about college recruiting, you've had 4 quarterbacks chosen in the top 15. So if you're a college football team and you're not going with the pro-style pass offense, how do you recruit a great quarterback?
Okay, so we've seen Eason now go to the Patriots after Jim Kelly, surprisingly in the minds of some people. I know you, Chris, went to Buffalo. Let's put Eason into behind the center, get ready to get the snap with the Patriots, and there's a crowd back there for the Patriots, and they've got some tough, hard choices to make in Rhode Island this year.
They do. I don't think they minded Kelly going before Eason, and I'll tell you why. They wanted Eason all along. They have their 2 veteran quarterbacks, Bobby, and Kavanaugh and Steve Grogan, are both damaged goods somewhat, the knee problems. Now, if they had 2 healthy veterans that they weren't that high on, they might have taken a shot at Kelly, but they want a guy that's physically sound, at least coming in, so they're going with Eason. My biggest question is whether Tom Flick. Now, they made a trade last year for Tommy Owen that ended up not playing at all behind Theismann, but getting a Super Bowl ring. Flick almost, some people say a couple of years ago, had a shot to beat out Theismann the way he was playing. Of course, not the way Theismann played last year. All of a sudden, it seems Flick has fallen out of favor. He looks like the odd man out, although actually one of those veterans could be odd man out. It's time for New England to develop a new quarterback. For a while, it looked like it's Flick. Now it looks like it's Tony Eason, and I hope Stanley Morgan hasn't read the only knock on Eason, that he lacks a little zip on the fastball. I'm not saying that. That's just what I've heard from some people. Stanley Morgan likes to see Grogan in there because he'll air it out 60 yards. Yeah. If Eason lacks the zip on the fastball, Stanley's going to go, oh, no, not again.
It's in the scouting report we have on Tony. He's a 4.3 on his 5 scale, 4.3 for his arm, 4.3 for his release, and his best marks are for reading and for his agility at a 4.5, so that might be borne out the lack of zing. Let's step for ahead. Atlanta's going to pick. One quick projection. Who do you think Atlanta's going to go for?
I'll give you a few projections. Atlanta's going to go with Pitts, Mike Pitts, as Paul said, down in New York. St. Louis picks next. Bud and I think they'll go for a defensive back, maybe Leonard Smith or maybe Joey Browner. I think Willie Galt's a lock for Chicago, the 3rd pick upcoming.
Your thought, though, that St. Louis might go for Dave Remington, I think it's got merit. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, they got Deerdorf there, but as you say, Deerdorf doesn't have that many years left at offensive side.
All right.
He's been a great one, though.
St. Louis will select after Atlanta. Atlanta is up, St. Louis, and then Chicago to follow. And we'll see what happens. Again, teams have 15 minutes per selection. No trade so far in this first round of the NFL draft. Let's see what's happening at the Sheraton now.
George, why Atlanta's taking so long?
Thanks, Bob. You're looking at the Atlanta Falcons desk as they are waiting on their selection. Whitey Zimmerman's the man on the right. He's been through a lot of these over the years, and he's on the phone now to Atlanta. Dan Henning and company as they try to hammer out their first selection in the first round. 6 minutes and counting as Zimmerman sits with Jim Hay, the treasurer of the Falcons, as they try to get the final word on Atlanta's pick. How do you
why do they call a guy with dark hair Whitey?
The Falcons, it's surprising, I guess, that they're taking so long, although maybe they're choosing between Mike Pitts at defensive end and Joey Browner a safety. As Paul was pointing out, Dan Henning likes Pitts a lot. There's talk the Falcons might switch to a 4-man line from the usual 3-4 they've played in the past. They have some age at line with Jeff Merrow and Yates, and a young guy they drafted last year, Doug Rogers. So it might be a tough decision, though, between those two players because they do need help on defense.
I can't understand why they're taking so long. I mean, according to everybody I talked to, Dan is just sold on Pitts if he doesn't play baseball. I'm just kidding.
The way this goes this year, he could.
That's right.
Standing by is Sal Marciano with some reflections on the way the first round has gone so far. Sal?
Okay, George, the first 15 picks, 4 quarterbacks. They are John Elway, Todd Blackledge, Jim Kelly, and Tony Eason. And this has happened 3 times in the first round of the NFL draft. The most memorable one being 1971. The first 3 picks were quarterbacks: Jim Plunkett, Archie Manning, Dan Pastorini. Last year, 3 quarterbacks went in the first round: Dave Wilson of New Orleans, Art Schlichter by Baltimore, Jim McMahon of Chicago. Now, the United States Football League's major criticism has been the fact that it's been shallow at quarterback, and I'm sure that the NFL would love to sign all the 4 quarterbacks they have picked so far to contracts to keep the USFL weak at that critical position. Now back to the podium, George.
Thanks, Al. We should point out one other thing, too. When you talk about National Football League, people around the league looking at this draft, they look at the number of quarterbacks, and they say this is their future for 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, because the quarterbacks are obviously your most visible athletes. So if you stock up in a year like this and sign these athletes, it's a critical point for the development of talent, a critical point for the development of familiarity with athletes in the league.
I'm glad you said and sign those athletes. That's the critical point in this day and age.
One thing that might be going on with this pick, and of course it is pure speculation, but St. Louis, with Tim Lewis gone, Chicago, I think, wants Willie Gault. Chicago picks after St. Louis. They might feel that the Cardinals are going to take Willie Gault, so they might be trying to talk to Atlanta to trade up those 2 spots, because Atlanta would still feel they might get Mike Pitts after the Cardinals would then pick.
I think that Atlanta, that would be a very risky move for Atlanta, because then they have to just gamble that St. Louis isn't going to take Pitts.
But they might figure they can still get Browner at that point.
But they want Pitts.
Another point that when Sal's discussion about the quarterback situation, he mentioned the number of quarterbacks taken. Ironically, the last number 1 draft pick of a quarterback was back in '75 when Steve Bartkowski of this Atlanta Falcons team was selected. And Bartkowski, while out of disfavor, showed up at the minicamp and says he's ready to play for Henning and play some good football. So we'll see how that develops. Here's the commissioner with the Atlanta Falcons pick in the first round of this 1983 National Football League draft.
Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta's first choice. Very good. Defensive end Mike Pitts of Alabama.
The Atlanta selection of Mike Pitts, and the commissioner has not mentioned it, but next up is the St. Louis Cardinals after their 5-4 record of a year ago. Jim Hanifin and company are standing by trying to figure out what to do. Let's take a look with Dave Sullivan on how they've done in the past.
The St. Louis Cardinals will draft in the 17th position in the first round of the draft. Just talk to the Cardinals about what a good draft can do for you. In just 4 seasons' time, the Cardinals have gone from a team beset with personnel problems and a host of drafting errors in the premium rounds to a club that earned a playoff berth on the strength of 4 consecutive quality drafts. A total of 14 starters were obtained since 1979, including 10 players, as well as the effective performance of veteran Dan Dierdorf, who made a key switch to offensive center. Cardinal management, long the vocal point of media criticism, must now be given credit for making a string of quality decisions. The hiring of Jim Hanifin, the keeping of veteran Jim Hart, despite a huge price tag to play as the backup quarterback, and maintaining confidence in the scouting operation that is run by George Boone. Now, it wasn't easy to justify such confidence until 1979. After all, no team in the league had made as many mistakes in the premium rounds in the period from 1970 through 1978. But of late, the only mistake that the Cardinals have made in player evaluation has been the third-round choice of John Sinnott in 1980. Sinnott, an offensive tackle from Brown, is actually starting, albeit in a stopgap situation for the Baltimore Colts. Now, neither Larry Slider nor Theodis Brown could earn a starting berth with a Cardinal team that made its first playoff appearance since the end of the Don Coryell era. In order for the Cardinals to progress further in the playoff chase, the team must continue to fortify its defense, especially the secondary and the linebacking area. The team is desperate for a top-flight cornerback capable of covering the best receivers in the sport one-on-one, as was evidenced by the failure to do so against the Packers in the postseason. And with Mel Gray heading for retirement, the team also needs a speedy wide receiver to complement starters Pat Tilley and Roy Green. The St. Louis Cardinals could also use another running back to add punch to an offensive backfield that lacked depth a year ago.
Thank you, David. The story of this National Football League draft continues to unfold. We are awaiting the St. Louis Cardinals pick in this 1983 draft. We'll be back with the Cards pick and more. 12 minutes and counting. Let's pause for these minutes.
St. Louis Cardinals pick on the first round. Leonard Smith, defensive back, McNeese State.
Commissioner Pete Rozelle on the announcement of the St. Louis Cardinals pick, the third defensive back taken, Leonard Smith, along with Lewis and Kennard, already taken as defensive backs at this juncture of the National Football League draft. We're waiting on the Minnesota Vikings now and their selection in the first round.
Well, Chicago's before Minnesota. The interesting thing about the Cardinals is, from what everything they said was, if Lewis wasn't there, they'd probably take wide receiver Willie Gault. But it's obvious the Cardinals went strictly for need here. They took the next cornerback on their board rather than taking Gault. And now with Chicago picking, I'm sure Jim Finks is happy because I would expect the Bears to take Gault. And then,
yeah, but don't forget Anderson is available.
That's right. Anderson is also available. He's a good return man. Perhaps he can help either Chicago or Minnesota. And now Minnesota might be looking. Everyone was figuring Don Mosbar for the Vikings. But now that they know that either Gault or Anderson will be there, playing inside the dome on the turf. They had injuries to wide receivers. Ahmad Rashad retired. Sammy White had some injuries at the end of the year. The Vikings now could turn around and take whichever wide receiver the Bears don't take.
Let's go back a year, too, and we got Marty McDowell, who was drafted last year, who didn't pan out this past year.
It was Darren Nelson in the first round.
Darren Nelson last year,
right.
But McDowell 2 years ago, who has been counted on to fill in and hasn't so far, so it's a critical year for him this coming year.
That's right.
Glenn Young is another pick I heard from Minnesota. That was assuming that all those receivers, highly ranked receivers, are gone. But, you know, no receivers have been drafted yet. That's the funny part. I think Minnesota would definitely take one of those two, unless they're afraid of the Anderson-Argovitz connection.
Okay, we're waiting on the draft for Chicago, then Minnesota to follow there. Let's go back to our ESPN headquarters in Bob Lee. Bob?
Thank you, George. And the pick that Chicago will be exercising shortly, they acquired last year on draft day, swapping selections with Tampa Bay, and Tampa Bay using that selection last year in the first round to go after Booker Reese. So the Bears are up. Let's again step back just a couple of picks, gentlemen, and look at some of the people that have already been selected. We spoke earlier with Tony Hunter out of now the Buffalo Bills, late of Notre Dame, cutting class, as Sal pointed out today. 12-yard average. He's a guy, Bud, who has been wide receiver, has played wingback, and only went to tight end at the end of his junior year in college.
Well, Hunter's got the quality that very few tight ends have, the ability to run after he has caught the ball. Running to get open, of course, is very, very important. But when he catches it, he's really a threat downfield, difficult to tackle.
2 touchdown receptions as a freshman, 2 as a junior. None this past year, but his best scouting grade, Chris, we'll see shortly, is for his hands at a 4.8.
Yes, his hands are outstanding. And as we mentioned before in the telecast, Bob, coming out of college, he is projected as a better professional tight end than Kellen Winslow. That's coming out of college now, and that's a pretty good projection. So that the Bills haven't had a big play tight end for many, I don't know if a long time. I'll have to check with McGuire on that. It's been a long while since they've had a big play tight end like this. And it's a good pick for Buffalo.
Okay, Buffalo, number 12 selection, taking Tony Hunter. Then, since Philadelphia did not, as expected, through most of the pre-draft speculation, Philly did not take James Jones. That task fell to Detroit. So the Lions have selected probably the best fullback in this draft. At 6'3", 235 pounds, had a great senior year, 206 receptions, yards, and 9 touchdowns overall. Man can catch the ball. He pointed that out to us during one commercial break as we spoke with him. He can catch football.
I've seen Jones play 3 times, and I believe that he's the most complete all-around football player that I have seen this past season. He's strong, he's fast, his exceptional ability is blocking. And he also catches the ball well, so what else can you ask?
He's versatile, as you pointed out, because he did play tight end as a freshman when he didn't rush all that much, and excellent blocker, and a very good basketball player. All-around athlete is what it comes down to.
Or an athlete. That's right. And, you know, Dexter Bussey is getting up in years with the Detroit Lions, and it's a good pick for Jones. A lot of people thought that he would go to Philadelphia. I know most of us did, but they picked Haddix instead. We do know that Jones had a bunion operation in the offseason. Now, whether that was enough to scare Philadelphia or whether that's just an oh-by-the-way fact, we'll have to wait and see. But Detroit obviously feels maybe he can block for Billy Sims while Billy stays in Detroit.
All right, if Billy stays in Detroit also, considering what's going to be happening there. Now, the number 16 pick overall in the draft, the Atlanta Falcons, as you predicted, Swami, defensive end Mike Pitts out of Alabama, a man with 4.8 speed, 260 pounds worth of Mike Pitts, and a very mobile man. Here's a fellow who was an outside linebacker, and then he beefed up, and they put him on the line, but he really was a stand-up type of end.
It doesn't make much difference where you play him. He's so agile and so strong. He can be a linebacker, he can be an end, and as you get a shakeout with injuries during the season, having somebody who can go from position to position is a tremendous coaching asset.
Well, I think Mike Pitts, the fact that he has never played a down lineman might hurt him just a little bit. But for Atlanta, let's face it, their pass rush has not been up to snuff. Their best pass rusher, Jeff Merrill, has been hurt much of the last few seasons. And as Howard pointed out earlier, they're going to go to a 4-3, I believe, under new coach Dan Henning this year. You know they have the linebackers to play behind there and to come in and blitz. And when they go to a 4-3, they needed help, especially at defensive end. And Mike Pitts is their type of guy.
Mike Pitts, and you put him in with Jeff Yates and Jeff Murrow, and it's apparent that there's going to be a need for him. Yates at age 32, as you mentioned. Murrow is 30, and of course they've got Doug Rogers, also at defensive end. Number 2 pick last year from Stanford, and really maybe Pitts could make that jump over Rogers and certainly claim one of those starting positions.
Yeah, I think he certainly can. I also think, Bobby, that Atlanta, you know, they have a playoff offense. They have you want to call it a Super Bowl offense? Certainly you can. But their defense has just not been up to snuff. The linebackers, sure, Joel Williams has been hurt, but they've got solid linebackers. They need a little help in the DBs, and they also need help on the defensive line. Now, we have understanding that the Falcons may be willing to deal Lynn Kane, perhaps to somebody in their own division, perhaps out west, okay? They drafted Gerald Riggs last year. That surprised a lot of people. Remember, Kane played quarters 1 and 3 at one of the running backs opposite Andrews, and Riggs played quarters 2 and 4. Maybe with trade bait Kane, they move up. That is just something that we should point out. We haven't had a trade of a player yet today, and I would imagine 1 or 2 of them are coming, Bob.
Okay, St. Louis, the last selection we just saw, selected Leonard Smith, cornerback out of McNeese State. And as we talked about possibly, but maybe they go for running back. No, they went for help in the secondary. And again, grading out to an 18-7. He's a very good man against the run. But whether he will start immediately, whether playing at McNeese has afforded him the experience, we'll have to, so let's plug him into the backfield where Carl Allen has signed to leave for Chicago of the USFL. You've got Jeff Griffin, but where does Smith fit in?
I think he's a better athlete. Kenny Green, of course, is a tremendous player, but I think that Smith has got the overall potential to be a true star. And the fact that he played at little school, a lot of the great players came from little schools, including Tony Bradshaw, or Terry Bradshaw.
We're awaiting the next selection by Chicago. 6 minutes, we understand, on the clock at the Sheraton in Chicago, then to be followed by Minnesota and San Diego. But that St. Louis selection, quickness and agility were the 2 highest grades that Leonard Smith had, and he's the first-round pick.
Well, Smith, some people have rated him, Bob, as the best man-to-man coverer, i.e. cornerback, in this draft, even better than Tim Lewis. I think the sigh that you heard, a little disappointment, was coming all the way 3,000 miles from us in San Diego. I think they would have liked to have Smith available for pick number 20 or number 22. I think they are hoping that Minnesota goes with Mosbar instead of Gary Anderson, and pick 20 for San Diego. They can go with Anderson. We expect Gall to go next for the Bears, but getting back to Smith, you know, a wise choice for St. Louis. Let's face it, they were burned and burned often in that playoff game against the Packers. It showed.
We have not yet had a trade in this first round. We have had John Elway, if you've just joined us, selected by Baltimore. There has been no trade yet. There will be a press conference at 5 Eastern, 2 Pacific time, at which point John Elway may address the question. And we have reports, as Greg Wyatt told us, that already has told Frank Kush he won't play for the Colts. Let's get back to New York City.
Thanks, Bob. I want to remind you that while Sal is working on the National Football League draft today, he'll be back in his familiar venue of Top Rank Boxing on ESPN live Thursday, 9 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Pacific. Featured bout 10-round welterweight matchup. Roger Stafford makes a return engagement on ESPN. It's Stafford against Rodriguez. And then in a featherweight bout, it'll be Bernard Taylor against Roosevelt Rico. The two feature matchups on our top-ranked boxing card. Join Sal and Al, 9 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Pacific, as we continue to bring you the best in boxing on your source for sports. Today, it's the best of the National Football League collegiate draft, as we are waiting on the Chicago Bears selection. They've already taken Jimbo Covert, the tackle from Pittsburgh, as their first selection in the first round. This second selection is as a result from Tampa Bay and the Booker Reese deal. So we are waiting now, and as you look at the Chicago phone area, that's Rudy Custer on the right. Rudy Custer has been around, we talk about since the early 50s. Rudy was around in the days when Bert Bell used to do it. Custer, the business manager of the Chicago Bears, and Dan Gleason on the left, as they await the word from Chicago, from Jim Finks and company, as they try to put together their second first-round pick. What's the speculation? I know you like
Al Davis.
You like the Davis connection.
Strike. Right. They're now. There's nobody on the phone there in the Chicago table. In the office, the phone is buzzing. Jim Finks and Al Davis talking to one another, poised to strike to get Elway. Baltimore hoping that it goes through, I think. What do you think, Howard?
It makes sense. The names that were talked about with the Raiders trading up to that 6th spot originally were Howard Long, the defensive lineman, and possibly Ted Watts, the cornerback. But Chicago had to make sure they got the offensive lineman they wanted, so they didn't want to make that deal with the 6th pick. Well, they have the offensive lineman they want. Now they have an 18th choice. Everyone thinks Willie Gault, but with time ticking away, under 3 minutes now, what we might be seeing is that the Elway thing coming back again, because Finks figures he can give up that pick. Hallis figures he won't have to pay another #1 draft pick and get a pretty good player from the Raiders, maybe even 2 players, and another pick somewhere else down the draft.
It appears they're getting some kind of word over the phone now, as we're under the 2.5-minute mark. They've filled out 1 card. It looks like they may have filled out 2 cards as we have sat here. You know, it's a question of which one they're going to pull and which one they're going to hand.
I'm having a little trouble with those helmet phones. You don't know whether a guy's answering a phone or performing a lobotomy.
You can pick one up, by the way. I think they go about $200 a piece.
I'll take a dozen.
2 minutes, just about. As we're waiting, it looks like they're having a little bit of difficulty hearing. They've filled out a couple of cards. We're waiting to see which one they'll finally pull, but it appears they're getting close. The Bears. Then after the Bears, it'll be the Minnesota Vikings. Bud Grant will get his first crack at the 1983 crop of senior athletes. And again, it's been talked about on ESPN and all over for the last couple of years, really, that the strength of this draft is related, yes, to the number of athletes, but also to the fifth-year seniors, those athletes that were redshirted back 5 years ago. For instance, Jimbo Covert, who was picked by the Chicago Bears from Pittsburgh, is one of those athletes, one of the strongest offensive linemen maybe ever to play the game. Okay, there's your card.
Two guys filled out cards. Both men at the Chicago table were filling out cards.
Howard, are your eyes good enough? Could you see any of the writing on those cards?
One of them was crossing it out. Unfortunately, my long lens glasses are not with me today.
Let's project.
But they're still waiting. It looks like maybe they've given him a choice of 2 guys.
They're not smiling.
No.
So that's not unique. Very often that will happen. They'll name 2 or maybe 3 people and then finally decide on the basis of what conversations went on back home.
Has anybody informed me you're only allowed to draft 1?
Last year, of course, there was the story supposedly of the draft of Tampa Bay involving, of course, our favorite Sean Farrell, that the man filling out the card actually turned in the wrong card. There was that report after the draft.
This is that pick right now. This is the Tampa Bay pick.
That's right.
Ironic.
How ironic.
How ironic. Life comes back to haunt you.
And again, for those of you that may have just joined us and are not familiar with the situation, you get 15 minutes for each pick in the first 2 rounds. After that, the rest of the draft, and this year it will be a 1-day draft, not 2 days as it has been in recent years. Every other pick for the finality of the draft will be 5 minutes per pick. If you should go past the limit, that 15-minute limit. You don't lose your pick. You just lose in rotation unless the National Football League officials up at the front, Jan Van Duzer, Al Ward, Joe Ryan, everybody who's sitting up there agrees that there is a reason to hold off. Here it is. Down the count goes.
They're going to blast off Rudy Custer if they don't make it.
There's the card. Here's the commissioner.
Chicago selection, first round. Wide receiver, Willie Galt from Tennessee.
See what the fans said?
Minnesota is up next. Willie Galt, as had been expected and rumored, goes to the Chicago Bears. So the Bears have 2 first-round picks, Jimbo Colbert of Pittsburgh and Willie Galt of Tennessee, the first wide receiver taken in this draft. And still to come, not a trade yet. On the West Coast, Greg Wyatt is standing by with an update on how things are developing in that section of the country. Greg?
George, it's funny you mentioned trade because there may be something brewing, and it involves the San Diego Chargers. John Elway has just gotten off the phone with the Stanford Sports Information Director, and he says there may be something cooking, and that is that the San Diego Chargers have 2 picks coming up, and that's a number 20 and a number 22. Possibility the Chargers are going to offer the 20, 22, and a first-round draft pick from next year to pick up Elway. And, of course, there's the other possibility, and that's Al Davis a little bit later in this draft. Back to you folks in New York.
Okay, good job, Greg. And again, as was the case last year when Chris Berner was in San Francisco and we were tracking down information, Greg Wyatt is on the West Coast this year, tracking down up-to-the-minute information as we try to hammer out what happens in the John Elway sweepstakes. Colts have picked him, but it's not over yet. We'll be back with more of ESPN's coverage of the draft after these messages.
Again from Greg Wyatt, something could be in the works involving San Diego for John Elway, who was drafted number 1 by Baltimore. There has been no trading yet in this first round of draft day proper. We'll get back to New York for the selection by Minnesota, but now let's get out to Hawthorne, New Jersey. Lord Jim's and our very own Leandra Riley. Leandra.
Well, Bob Lee, something better be in the works. This is a national championship hand without a national championship ring. The Penn State Nittany Lions have not yet received their championship rings for their fine performance last season. The man I'm holding hands with is Greg Garrity, and he can boast being an athlete who walked onto the Penn State team, was a 4-year letterman and a 3-year starter, and I'm afraid that the great state of Pennsylvania has a lot to boast about this day. 4 athletes from that state who played their college ball there have been drafted already in the first round, and 2 of them came from your school. Your thoughts on our 2 players drafted from Penn State, 3rd and 7th?
Well, Kurt Warner and Todd Blackledge are 2 of the premier players on our team this year, and I think they've proved themselves and did really well this year, and I think they deserve to be the first-round draft choices.
Were you surprised at all at the teams that selected them, or your thoughts on maybe how they'll mesh in with those teams that did choose them?
Well, I think everyone sort of knew where Kurt was going to go, but Todd sort of was a surprise a little bit, and I think he's going to mesh in real well. Of course, I think he's going to do real well in the league, and we're just going to have to wait and see.
I know we're putting you under the pressure here, putting you on television, but I'm sure there's a lot of pressure on you just waiting for a draft choice.
There's a lot of pressure. It's just, I don't know, just sit there and wait, and that's all I can do right now.
Okay, I'm glad you're waiting with us. We'll be watching your reactions when you are selected. Thank you much, Greg Garrity, and let's go back to our gentleman in Bristol, Connecticut.
Thank you, Leandra. We are awaiting the selection by Minnesota, but Chicago picking for the 2nd time in the first round with the selection they acquired last year from Tampa Bay. Today picked Willie Galt, but now let's get the Vikings selection, their first pick in this 83 draft.
Maxwell, then
Minnesota Vikings, first-round selection. Defensive back, Joey Browner, USC. Next pick, San Diego, by nature of a previous trade with Green Bay.
Okay, Joey Browner of the University of Southern California.
Okay, George, at that point when San Diego picks number 20, we'll see if any fireworks will happen, if any trading will happen. But Joey Browner, the defensive back out of USC, picked by Minnesota, number 19. Backtracking to Willie Galt, who has been selected. The Olympic class, the Olympic runner out of Tennessee. Look at that, 4.43 speed. And was on the Olympic team back in 1980. An excellent kick returner. That it might be his forte. Tied an NCAA record back in 1980 when he had 3 kickoff returns for a touchdown. And from scrimmage, an excellent player.
Well, the thing that's different about Galt, most sprinters are taught to run with their weight too far forward. They're trying to get that straight-ahead speed, but this man has got the agility, as you can see here, to change direction without losing speed. And he's also got great hands, great eyes, catches the ball.
Averaging about 27 yards as a junior in kickoff returns, and caught 8 touchdown passes over the last 2 seasons and had about 650 yards in receptions. The Chargers, this could be a moment of high drop. Where are we going to stand with the Chargers? Let's get back to the Sheridan.
Trade. Thanks, Bob. Let's go to the commissioner and see if the trade was worked.
San Diego, first-round selection. Wide receiver, Gary Anderson of Arkansas.
As night sets on the Baltimore Colts.
So Gary Anderson does go to San Diego, not to where some of the projections had put him.
The sun is setting on Baltimore. We were sitting here projecting a trade for those 2 San Diego low picks for Elway, and now I think the curtain is ringing down.
It would appear that if anything was going to transpire, it would have been before this pick. Something could happen after this pick, but it's highly doubtful now.
It certainly appears that way. But as things happen in the NFL, talking to people in Baltimore last night, there was a talk that maybe they'd have to take Elway and make a trade later, but they didn't want San Diego to be making their picks for them. Who's to say they couldn't turn it? But San Diego right now with Billy Ray Smith helping in the defense, Gary Anderson, a good wide receiver,
and another defensive
and now they have another player 2 picks from now. They get a good defensive end, a linebacker. They can just about do anything. Jim Jeffcoat, there's so many names out there they can still add. It's just a matter of Gene Klein have to pay all those 3 #1 picks, but they might look at it and say, hey, we don't need John Elway.
Yeah.
We've really upgraded
I really
our team.
can't see how Baltimore can make a deal now. They can't trade for veterans. Well, Cush has said all along they want drafts, they don't want veterans, and they're going back on that. It's going to be tough to eat the pick and get nothing out of it. I really feel sorry for them.
Ironic, too, because all of the discussions in the last couple of years surrounding San Diego stockpiling picks for the possibility of a trade, and now they end up using those picks, and they could end up being better off than all the trade talk that has been transpired.
Well, one of my thoughts was, as great as John Elway is, I don't know if I would trade that many picks. And you have to look at it. The 4 Pro Bowl quarterbacks last year, there were 3 number 3s and a number 4. You go back the last 3 Super Bowls, the 6 starting quarterbacks, there was only 1 number 1, Jim Plunkett. You don't necessarily need the great quarterback that's picked number 1 in the draft to get to the Super Bowl.
You know, it's easy to
do it with other players.
It's easy to second guess it now, but I think what everybody's afraid of is being embarrassed. If a guy turns out to be an all-timer, then you say, well, we let him go. And for years, you remembered as that.
Okay, standing by, back at our ESPN headquarters is Bob Lee, with a fellow who's got to have a smile on his face. Joey Browner of the Trojans has been selected. Bob?
Thank you, George. Let's get right to the telephone and talk with Joey Browner. Joey, congratulations, number 19 selection, going to Minnesota. I guess you've just learned about the selection yourself.
Yes, I did.
They project you possibly as a strong safety in the pros. You played corner as an underclassman. You're free safety your senior year. What's your favorite position?
Well, it doesn't really matter. You know, I played all the positions, so they're about equal. So whichever one they decide to play, they'll bring it.
I think that the tradition that you represent is certainly a great asset, and I feel that that's one of the reasons that Minnesota's strong for you.
Well, you're playing, you know, a couple of years ago, you'd be coming from USC and you'd be saying, oh, no, I'm outside. It's 20 below zero. AstroTurf going to be your home surface. What do you think of that, Joey?
I never really played on it except for in high school my senior year, but, you know, I've been playing on grass for years, so it'll be something new for me.
Have you talked to your brother Ross of the Bengals about what you're about to go through now? As a first-round selection, it's going to be a little bit of pressure on your shoulders going to camp, and also getting and hammering out a good contract. Have you talked it with your older brother?
Well, I've talked to him a little bit about it, but, you know, it wasn't until now that, you know, I found out what team I was going with, and so now it's just a matter of just going in there and trying to get where I can. But I've talked to him about it.
Okay, thanks, Joey. Congratulations again. Joey Browner out of USC, the number 19 selection overall. And looking at the scouting reports, his best number is for force. He's a man with a lot of power, and he'll be playing in the Minnesota Vikings backfield. Pittsburgh is about to select. Joey Browner having been selected by Minnesota, Gary Anderson by San Diego. How about the Steelers?
Glenn Smith, hot as a pistol.
Okay, Bob, we're waiting on the Steelers to see who their selection will be in the first round. The first pick for them of the day. They have one in the first round, one in the second, one in the third, and one in the fourth round. You're looking at the Pittsburgh Steeler desk, and Bob McCartney, who is manning the desk with them, talking with the folks back in Steeltown as they try to take their #1 pick. Speculation here on who they'll be taking.
I had the feeling they're going to be taking the defensive tackle, Gabe Rivera from Texas Tech, and then going into a 4-3. Now with Ray Penny, their starting offensive tackle, gone to the USFL, they might go Mosbar, but I think they feel that there's a drop-off in quality, that Rivera is really the defensive lineman they want, and Mosbar is just another guy. They could go wide receiver, worried about their
Jim Smith is gone, too.
Smith. They say Hawthorne is working out every day and looking very good at a receiver, so maybe they'll try and tough it through, hoping that he won't get hurt, go with the 2 wide receivers. I just have a feeling they're going to go for Rivera.
Linebacker might certainly be a possibility with the retirement of Jack Ham. Vernon Maxwell from Arizona State is available, as is Darryl Talley from West Virginia. So you could see the Steelers doing that. Again, there's a number of players that could probably step in right away and help them. But certainly, as Paul pointed out, the defection of Ray Penny yesterday certainly could have them looking towards the offensive line.
This has been a team, when you look at it over the course of the last year, that's really gone through a great deal of transition. First, the coaches that left to the USFL, then the players that have gone to the USFL. New coaching staff, really, half the coaching staff was turned over. You got to give Chuck Noll credit for the job he did. And we talked earlier about who might have been hurt by the strike. I think this was the team that was hurt most by the strike this past year.
Steelers have been severely wounded on all fronts by the strike, by Terry Bradshaw getting hurt. Now he has an elbow operation that they say isn't serious. Who knows? USFL taking 2 coaches and 3 players. I mean, they're getting bounced around, but I love that organization. I think they'll be back.
Okay, we're waiting on the Pittsburgh Steelers selection. This their first pick of the 1983 collegiate draft. And while we're dealing with football today, don't forget, as it is the case in every April, as it has been over the last couple of years, it'll be the case again this year. We'll be bringing you WCT tennis, the WCT finals on ESPN. That's at 1:30 on the East Coast, 10:30 on the West Coast, starting Thursday. That's April the 28th. From Reunion Arena, Jim Simpson will be there, Cliff Drysdale will be there, our award-winning team of tennis telecasters for the quarterfinals, live semifinal, and live championship coverage. It ends Sunday, May the 1st at 3 o'clock Eastern and noon Pacific. Lendl, McEnroe, Gerolaitis. Well, we've had some great tennis over the last couple of years. Ironically, usually it's the night before the draft, but the schedule's been changed a bit this year. We usually get a chance to watch it the night before, back-to-back coverage, so it's a big week of football, a big week of NBA basketball coming up tonight on ESPN, and the WCT finals as well. 7 minutes and change, and you can see the selection being made on the card. But again, remember, it's not odd to pick 2 or 3 players, have the cards written out, so when you get down to the wire, you just select one of those cards. But it looks like we've got a selection here for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Commissioner checking some pronunciation.
Pittsburgh Steelers, first round selection. Defensive tackle, Gabriel Rivera, Texas Tech.
You have him?
Score one, presume.
Next up, San Diego.
I need one real bad.
Very few defensive linemen have gone in this draft so far. Pitts went as the first defensive end, and Rivera now goes. So we are waiting now on the San Diego Chargers to come back and do it again.
Artie Rooney's comment about him, you know, he's got very small legs and big upper body and belly. Says he's built like Babe Ruth.